I find it very difficult to open my mouth and speak. At one of the more tragic events in Chamisha Chumshei Torah, when Aaron HaKohen, anticipating many months, his great day of the completion of the Mishkan, his two dear sons die in front of his eyes. And his response establishes Jewish response to tragedy, Lanetzach, at least Ad Yemot HaMashiach. And that is Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron went silent. One does not have to be a very, very big thinker to understand, and I think these concepts are brought down. Vayidom, not just Vayidom of the mouth, Vayidom of the mind, where his thoughts go silent. And when our thoughts go silent, silence of acceptance, which requires a lot of humility, that Aaron HaKohen, we know from so many different directions, so deeply had. So then it's hard to open up one's mouth. And yet at the same time, we have a very big chiyuv, an obligation, to try to understand God's world and God's ways to the extent that we're able to. In the way that we'll try to elaborate on the little time that we have now. On another level, I find it difficult to open up my mouth, and I think many people do. We've had many terrorist attacks in the past years, generations, earlier pogroms, many massacres. There's something about what happened this week, which I think for many people, for different reasons, threw things to a different level, to a new degree. It hit very close. In a neighborhood you would least expect, English-speaking community, so familiar, so many people have some kind of a connection. It's not East Yerushalayim, it's not the old city, it's not Itamar in the Shomron, Har Nof. In the local shul of Bnei Torah, Talmidei Chachamim, Anashim Yirei Shamayim, in the middle of Tfilat Shmoneh Esrei, for them to meet at the peak of a moment of the day, of complete Yirat Shamayim, Tahara, Kedusha, to meet the complete other side, literally the dark side of the moon, of God's world. I can't say anything, but we have a chiyuv yes to say. Yesterday and today, different people in Yeshiva, some students, some staff came over, I'm sure not just to me, but also to me, wanted to speak, wanted to hear, had questions. And during the developing of yesterday and today, I thought it would be fitting that there should be a place to share some thoughts on the matter. Usually this slot, I think it's the first time ever I'm speaking in this slot. It's defined as a Musar Shmuz slot. I don't know how to give a Musar Shmuz. I'm not a Bar Hachi to give Musar. I'm not trying to sound humble. I don't connect to the term. It's not me. I'm trying to share thoughts. What you do with the thoughts, that's for every person to decide. This morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, I went up the steps right here up to the Beit Midrash, and I saw my close friend and colleague here in Yeshiva that we all love so much, Rav Ami. And I didn't see him the day before, and I didn't get to say Mazal Tov to him. I was too busy to call him, and I gave him a big hug. And as I'm hugging him and saying Mazal Tov, my eyes chapped that up the steps somebody, and I appreciate that it was done, put up the pictures, the faces of the people who Hashem Yinkom Damam Hakdoshim of this week. And I've been anticipating to see faces, to be able to some level connect. Maybe somehow I know them. I get to Har Nof a lot. And this happened at the same moment. I'm giving Rami a hug. Mazal Tov. Rami is beaming, and he has every right to. And his wife should continue beaming with many more tzmachot to come, including girls, Be'ezrat Hashem. I told him, not that I know much about it, Al Pi Kabbalah, the seventh has to do with a b'china of a nukba, of a female. So Be'ezrat Hashem, the next one will be a daughter. Be'ezrat Hashem. But in any case, It happened simultaneously. I see the pictures from far, and I'm giving Rav Ami a hug, and I'm experiencing it also tonight. Beautiful simcha that we have here, coming together of so many aspects of the beauty of Netiv Aryeh, of one of my closest friends in Yeshiva, outside of Yeshiva, Rabbi Yoel, with one of our dear Talmidim. Simcha also beyond words, and at the same time I'm rushing out of the porch in order to give a sikha about what I think is very, very important to address as a yeshiva. I often quote, I heard from an Adam Gadol here in Yerushalayim, that when you do something le'ilui neshama, when you devote something to do le'ilui nishmat, it's only going to work, he said, if you who do it are going to get an ilui neshama yourself as a result. But if you're going to do something and your neshama here in our world in Olam Hazeh is not going to be elevated, as a result you're not causing in the parallel world of Olam Haba in ilui neshama. And I'd like to, of course, devote this sikha tonight to ilui nishmat, these four kedoshim. And you know what? I'm not sure one can say this, but I have a need to say it, whether it's acceptable or not. I won't say le'ilui nishmat, but I'll say at least for the zchut of another human being, not a Jew, who is moser nefesh to save Jewish lives. And this evening is dedicated to him as well. But what I'd like to do, attempt for myself, and I'm going to try to share with whoever else would be able to relate to these words, to try to produce, not despite what happened in Ilui Neshama for us, but because of what happened in Ilui Neshama for us, and as a result, Bezrat Hashem to devote it to Ilui Nishmat Kedoshim Hashem Yinkom Damam. Let's begin. Parashat HaShavua, Toldot, please take your source sheet. Source number 1. Now, for people who come regularly to our Chumash year, Shana Aleph people, for you people, this is a continuation of a lot of things we spoke about in the past few weeks. And for people who do not, it's an independent sikha. I tried to design it in a way that it works for both. For the Chumash people, if there are elements which are repetitive for you, I apologize. Take it as hopefully productive chazara. Okay. Source number 1, Pasuk Yutet in Bereshit, Parshat Toldot begins, Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak, the last 3 lines in source number 1. Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham Olidet Yitzchak. We spoke about it in the Chumash year. Anybody who has a little logic in his head, there's something very strange about this pasuk. It's so incredibly circular. Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham Olidet Yitzchak. But if one wants to open up his eyes and to realize at least at the most basic pshat level what's going on over here, one needs to go one step earlier and ask oneself, Me'ayin bata, to the beginning of Parshat Eila Toldot. Me'ayin bata, from the end of Chayei Sarah. What's the closing Parshiyah? What's the closing piece of Parshat Chayei Sarah? That which is line number 1 in source number 1, and that is Ve'ele Toldot Yishmael ben Avraham. A sensitive ear hears, compare and contrast. Ve'ele Toldot Yishmael ben Avraham. Asher yalda Hagar Mitzrit Shifchat Sarah leAvraham. Compare and contrast to Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham Olidet Yitzchak. Meaning, it's impossible to understand the first pasuk of Parshat Toldot out of the context of its relationship to the way Parshat Chayei Sarah ended. Meaning, the switch from last week's Parsha to this week's Parsha, from Chayei Sarah to Toldot, and this is a significant point which we're starting off with, is a comparison, if you wish, a clarification, a berur, between Yitzchak and Yishmael. Toldot Yitzchak, Toldot Yishmael, without going into definitions of Toldot right now, it would take us out of our immediate discussion. Now, clarification between, and the choosing between, I'm saying, from the God's perspective, from history's perspective, as Sefer Bereshit is going through stage after stage of selecting, and we are at these weeks in the selection stage between Yishmael and Yitzchak, the question of selecting and clarifying between Yishmael and Yitzchak is constantly taking place in these parshiyot. We'll see 2 expressions of that. One is in source number 2, look inside, from Parshat Vayera, we recently read it. You need the wisdom of a good Jewish woman, and that goes much more deep and much more profound. However, even if we just say it as such, we need Sarah's eye to pick up as to where things are evolving into. Ezu chachama, for the sake of this matter, haro'ai tanolad, and she's able to tell based on what she sees in front of her eyes, the misbehavior and misconduct of Yishmael, ותרס שרה את בן הגר המצרית אשר ילדה לאברהם מצחק. ותאמר לאברהם, גרש האמה הזאת ואת בנה, כי לא ירש בן האמה הזאת עם בני עם יצחק. And Abraham had a hard time with that. We all know that, etc., etc. And it continues. Source number 3. Source number 3, as we progress to the Akedah, the Psukim explicitly do not say that. You need the Ruach HaKodesh of Chazal to open up our eyes as to what's going on. Avram is going to the Akedah. At the end of Parshat Vayera, look inside source number 3. וישכם אברהם בבוקר, ויחבוש את חמורו, ויקח את שני נעריו איתו, ואת יצחק בנו, ויבקע עצי עולה, ויקום וילך אל המקום אשר אמר לו אלוהים. The first time that we're going to reach the future site of Beit HaMikdash, right here. The first time that we get there. And the first time that we get there is described as such. Avram comes with his chamor. We didn't have to say who he's coming with, which exactly vehicle. And if he was coming with a Mercedes or a camel, it's irrelevant. It's relevant if we are telling us that he's coming with a chamor. Now let's see the extent of how relevant that is. So we're continuing. ביום השלישי, וישא אברהם את עיניו, וירא את המקום מרחוק. He sees the site, meaning the future Beit HaMikdash Mount, Har Moriah. He sees it from far. How does he know that that is the mountain? Chazal teaches, Rashi brings it down. He sees the cloud of Shechina attached to the mountain. And he knows, oh, that's the place. Vayomer Avraham, I'm continuing on. This is the crux of it. Pasuk Hey. Vayomer Avraham el Ne'arav. He turns it to the Ne'arim. Chazal teach us, who are they? Yishmael and Eliezer. Shvu lachem po im hachamor. Our good old chamor friend. Sit here with a chamor. V'ani v'hana'ar, a different na'ar, is referring of course to Yitzchak. Nelcha ad ko, interesting phrase, we won't focus on it right now. Nelcha ad ko, whatever that may mean. V'nishtachaveh v'nashuv aleichem. What's the meaning of these psukim? Chazal open up our eyes to understand that Abram turns to Yitzchak and says, Yitzchak, do you see what I see? Yitzchak says, yes. Yishmael, do you see what I see? Eliezer, do you see what I see? They both say no. So Avram says, Shvu lachem po im hachamor. You need to be chazal to pick up on it. The Torah did not have to say it in that fashion. Just wait for us. What's the Shvu lachem po im hachamor? You need to be chazal to understand the Torah's exact, to the extent of every single word and every single letter. And that is, sit here with a chamor. You need Chazal's ear to tell us what's going on. Just like the chamor can see what's hovering over the mountain, so you cannot as well. The way Chazal bring it out, it sounds extremely not politically correct. I don't care, especially in a week like this week. And that is, Am hadomeh lechamor. And I don't mind if these windows here are open, actually. Am hadomeh lechamor. Im hachamor, Chazal darshan and switch the punctuation. A people whose resembles the chamor. That's Chazal's definition of Yishmael and Eliezer. Now, a thinker understands this is quite dramatic, because the question is, Sefer Bereshit is busy checking out and clarifying who is suitable to go up to Har Moriah, who has a belonging to Har Habayit, to the future site of Beit HaMikdash, who does not have a belonging to that place. Now, why is it so relevant, and why am I starting to speak loud? Because of the Ramban. What did the Ramban teach us? The Ramban quotes a line from that actually appears in Chazal, that most of us, I think, know, and that sets the stage and defines the entire essence of all of Sefer Bereshit, from the beginning to the end. And the Ramban has some of the most gigantic shoulders ever in history, ever, both in Halakha and in Kabbalah, of the earlier Kabbalah, pre-Arizal. And the Ramban teaches us, Sefer Bereshit, and it's an underlying theme in his entire parish of Sefer Bereshit. Sefer Bereshit given another title, Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, which means every detail in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, if you wish, is planting genes, seeds, prototype patterns for that which will unfold in history. And if it's not doing that in Sefer Bereshit, it cannot be, because that's what Sefer Bereshit is by definition. By essence, it's inherently so. Every detail that will appear in Sefer Bereshit is busy creating history. That's the meaning of Sefer Bereshit, called Sefer Yetzirah, in fact, in the Lashon of the Ramban. Because it's busy creating the building blocks of the entire course of history. Anything that, I'll say the other side of the coin is the same thing. everything that will ever unfold has to have had origins in Sefer Bereshit. And if it did not have origins in Sefer Bereshit, it can't be in history. That's the extent of the way the rule of Chazal, specifically the Ramban, comes out. Now, why is this relevant? Because what this Ramban is saying, you who are Ben Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, you have a chiyuv, an obligation hovering over you to read Parshat Toldot every year as it switches from Parshat Chayei Sarah or Bechlal these Parshiot. And if Sefer Bereshit at this stage is clarifying between Yishmael and Yitzchak, and at the same time Sefer Bereshit is nothing but defining the patterns of history, you have an obligation not just to make sure you don't sleep during laning, you have an obligation to try to figure out what is the Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim over here. And in what way is the clarification between Yitzchak and Yishmael, we'll put Yitzchak from now on first, of course, the clarification between Yitzchak and Yishmael, how does that manifest historically? And if you do not do that, you're not living up to being Yotzei, the chiyuv of reading every year Sefer Bereshit. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I'm saying what I'm saying. With this background, let's see a fascinating, I think, Laniyut Dati, an absolutely fascinating Gemara. Source number 5. Look inside. Omeret HaGemara, in source number 5, Vayisa Meshalo Vayomar, Oy mi yichye misumo el. Quote from Parshat Balak and Sefer Bamidbar. You have it. I photocopied it to the right of that same source number 4. ועתה הנני הולך לעמי, לך יעצך אשר יעשה העם הזה לעמך באחרית הימים. This is, those of you who remember Parshat Balak, the way it works, Bilam opens up his mouth 3 times to curse the Jewish people. Each time Hashem, ויהפוך Hashem אלוקיך לך את הקללה לברכה, Hashem turns the klala into a bracha, and then comes the 4th time. And this 4th time is special. Bilam doesn't ask for it. He knows already. There's already, even Balak understands the concept of chazaka. And that's it. After 3 times, it's not going to work anymore. But now Bilam says, I'm not asking you to invite me to speak. I'm going to speak now on my own invitation. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's invitation. And he starts speaking. And Chazal, not that I know much about it, but I do know what the sources at least say about it. These psukim over here, from Pasuk Yudalid and down, further than what I just photocopied, a little more, contain the secrets, according to Chazal, of the way history is going to work all the way to the end of days, specifically at the end of days. Melchemet Gog and Magog, etc. are included within the psukim. It's coming out, as surprising as it may be, and as strange as it may be, dafka from the mouth of that Rasha, Bilam HaRasha. In the context of that, skip down please with me, you'll see he's going through different nations and talking about their ultimate eternal fate, such as the classic Vayaret Amalek Vayomar, you'll see it inside. Reshit Goyim Amalek, Pasuk Kaf, you'll often hear it coming when you come around Purim, you'll hear that pasuk quoted a lot. And then if you skip to the last line of source number 4, that's the pasuk that the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin is going to quote. Vayisam Shalo vayomar, Oy mi yichye misumo el. Strange sounding pasuk. Can't understand just at face value what's this pasuk saying, what Hashem is saying, if you wish, through the mouth of Bilam. Says the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin in the long sugiyot, if you may be familiar, of Ikvat HaDemashicha, long agadatas, one daf after another, loaded with information as to the nature of Ikvat HaDemashicha, what I think all Jews, regardless of the color of their kippah, agree that we're there. It's other titles or definitions that people will fall into arguments as to whether they accept it or not. And too bad that people waste so much time on arguing on those definitions. But Ikvat HaDemashicha, everybody agrees that we're there. You'll hear it from so many different sources, earlier than our generation, for sure in our generation. And the context of that, here the Gemara says like this: Vayisam Shalo vayomar, Oy mi yichye misumo el. There's the round brackets over here. We'll read it anyways. Amar Rish Lakish, Oy mi shemechaye atzmo b'shem el. Oy, for he who keeps himself alive or draws his life from the Shem Kel. Not so clear. Putting it aside, Kedana bear it in mind as we go on. The Gemara continues. Amar Rav Yochanan. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Oi, we all know what oi means. Oi, la la umma. Oi to that nation. Oi to that power in the world, shetimatzeh, that it will be found, b'sha'ah she'akadosh baruch hu oseh pidyon lebanav. Oi to the nation that will be found at the time when Hashem is busy redeeming His children. Continues the Gemara and gives the following mashal: Mi matin, meaning who has the guts? Who would dare? Matil ksuto. Who would dare put a garment, a barrier between the lion and the lioness? When the lion and the lioness come together to mate, who would be the fool and who would have the guts to put a barrier or a garment between them? That is the mashal, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the end of days will be busy regathering His children and will be redeeming His children over a process. Oi, there will be an oi to that nation. We're warning it. It's going to pay its price at the end for putting a barrier between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the people of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the end of days when God is busy redeeming them. Look at Rashi. Basically, he explains it. The Rashi just below. Oi la la'uma shetimatzeh, oi la la'uma shetihiyeh b'otan hayamim, oi to that nation that will be there at the end of days. In those days, she'ya'aleh al da'ata, they will have the havamina le'akev Yisrael, to prevent Klal Yisrael from coming together back with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara sotemet. The Gemara does not tell us which ummah, what nation, which power in the world this actually is. Before we move on, and before we try to possibly see what nation actually Chazal are maybe hinting here towards, let's give a little more background. And the little more background is the following. Turn the page, please. And source number 6, what we find over here, back in Parshat Lech Lecha, is the famous the first of two britot that Hashem koret im Avraham Avinu beParshat Lech Lecha. This is not Brit Milah, this is Brit Ben Abetarim. Quickly, we'll do this, we're running out of time. Brit Ben Abetarim works as follows. Hashem promises Avraham Avinu a child, and Avraham believes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he gets credit for that. And Hashem continues and promises in the land of Israel. And Avraham says, how do I know that I will in fact inherit the land? There's a seemingly surprising discrepancy between his responses. The way Mefarshim explain it, and even our Talmidim came up with it on their own, I must say, in our Chumash year the other week, and that is, the difference is, it doesn't matter that it's against all the laws of biology, physiology, and fertility. If God promises me a child, He invented those laws, He will give me a child. But the land of Israel, Avraham Avinu already understands, you don't just receive, you receive to the extent that you merit it. You have to live up to certain standards in order to receive the land. We read it Yom Kippur afternoon. If we live by the laws of relationships, the abominations of Mitzrayim and Canaan, we get to be vomited out of the land. It's not my words, it's the harsh words of Parshat Achrei Lot. We read it Yom Kippur afternoon. V'lo taki haaretz etchem. As an example, and that's been proven over and over throughout history. The Jewish people don't live up to the Brit with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The land of Brit throws us out. And we go out to Galut. So Avraham says, I can't take responsibility for my children. I'm not going to be around anymore. I'm going to be buried in Marat HaMachpelah. And my children may live in a way that they don't merit Eretz Yisrael. So how do I know that Eretz Yisrael will be mine? Hashem responds with Brit Ben Abetarim. Now please listen carefully. What does that mean? So Hashem says to him, take these 4 species, slice them in half, hence Ben Abetarim, walk between them, not going into all the details, and their 5th species, and that is the dove, or the bird, the gozal. Don't slice it, keep it whole at the end, and that is my promise to you. Your children are going to go down to be persecuted by a people, Mitzrayim, of course, even though the Pasuk doesn't say so, and they will be there for a long time until I take them out, and they'll become a people as a result. Basically tells them about Galut Mitzrayim, and they're coming out of Mitzrayim, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Chazal will tell us, what's going on? What are these 4 species? What's the dove, the bird? They're sliced. He's not sliced. Mazeh. What does that got to do with anything? You need, again, Chazal's eyes. And what Chazal teaches is nothing less than the following. that Hashem is revealing here to Avraham Avinu, says Midrash Rabbah and other Midrashim I think as well, nothing less than the historical pattern of the Jewish people from beginning to the end of days. And these four species, first secrets which are beyond at least me, represent each one in their turn one of the world powers that will take over the world, rule over it, take over Klal Yisrael, exile Klal Yisrael, and Klal Yisrael is going to have to be under their ruling and their exile. The first of the species is relating to the power of Babel, the Babylonian world power. World power that means taking over the entire world. Going on to the Persians and the Parasul Madai, during which the story of Purim takes place. Going on to the Greeks, Hanukkah coming up soon, and going on finally to Galut Edom, the Roman Empire that turns into the Christian world, that Western world that rules over the world, according to Chazal, at least all the way to the days of Yemot HaMashiach. So much so is this the pattern. It's based on the prophecies, by the way, of Daniel, Sefer Daniel. And it's embedded already in the beginning of Maaseh Bereshit. Va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom, v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Say Chazal, each of those terms, tohu, vohu, choshech, and tehom, refers to these four exiles. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, ze rucho shel melech HaMashiach. The entire pattern history of the Jewish people in the very origins of Sefer Bereshit. The slicing of these animals means the Jewish people, your children, Abraham, are going to slice through these world powers, which each one in their turn will turn into the dust of history. And the bird, representing Klal Yisrael, will remain intact and whole all the way to the end of the days. And that's the secret. You're afraid that your children are going to go after derech? So fine. Not fine, but fine. So they'll be exiled. And they'll learn the hard way, stage after stage. They'll have to go through another exile to clarify themselves, to learn from their mistakes, and then they'll come back to Eretz Yisrael, and then they go again out to another exile, until they go through each stage, cleanse, fix, correct each and every one of their mistakes, each generation and their issues, so that by the end of days they'll be able to come back to the land of Israel, and hopefully we're at that stage, and be able to merit Eretz Yisrael for eternity. And that's what Hashem's response is. There's no voodoo here. There's nothing strange. It's the entire course of the history of the Jewish people from beginning to the end of days. Nothing less dramatic than that is what Brit Bein HaBetarim is about. We're cutting here, we're signing a deal over history. That's the Brit. We're going through history together. Me, God, he says of course, and you, the Jewish people. We're going through history together. I can't work without you. You can't work without me. If you have a philosophical problem with what I just said, you're welcome to come to me personally afterwards. I can't, I'll repeat it again, work without you. That's the way Hashem chose for His world to work. You can't work without me. We're going to journey through this together. Not stam that we so often compare our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to that of marriage. We're going to journey through life, but now it's the macrocosmic life. Marriage of history together. Or whatever that may mean. However that long that may take, and I'll always be there with you. And it's Moshe Rabbeinu later on Parshat Ki said and insisted that it would be so. You don't go without us. We're not going to go without you. Don't send an angel. We're together in it. I always quote the famous words of Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden was one of the leaders of Klal Yisrael a few hundred years ago. And in his famous introduction to his Siddur, Bet Yaakov, I think they probably have it here in the library, he says the following words. Had I stood at Kriyat Yam Suf, says this big Gadol of Klal Yisrael, had I stood at Kriyat Yam Suf, Kriyat Yam Suf would not be as big as a testimony for the truth of Torah and for Mitziyut Hashem as the ongoing existence of the Jewish people throughout the ages, despite all attempts to demolish them. That's a greater manifestation and testimony for God's ruling over the world, more so than Kriyat Yam Suf itself. Those are his words. And you can hear in the background, possibly, the words of the Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, that he whose belief in God is based on miracles, Kol ha'ma'amin al pi ha'otot yesh belibo dofi. There's something off in his emunah, if it's off miracles. I'll add, in our emunah seminar day, we'll talk about it more. Today we'll call that thing proofs. He who believes in God based on proofs, says the Rambam, I'm allowing myself to make that equation. You don't have to accept it. I'll claim so. Hama'amin al pi ha'otot, and I'll add, or al pi ha'hochachot, borrowed from scientific terminology. Yesh belibot dofi. Rabbi Yaakov Emden said, I don't look for proofs. I'm gazing at history. And I'm looking back at hundreds and thousands of years. And me, like you in the future, and other Jews in the past, sit once a year, Seder night, and say, Bechol dor v'dor omdim aleinu lechalotenu ve'akadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam. Is this an interpretation of history? Okay, yes. Is this reality? Every Jew needs to decide for himself. Is this proven by history? Does history testify that there's nothing to history other than God that rules over it? Taking the Jewish people from Yetziat Mitzrayim, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, century after century, all the way to Achrit HaYamim. One process, starting in Yetziat Mitzrayim, ending in Yamot HaMashiach, ongoing God's ruling over the world, taking Klal Yisrael to that place. Rav Yaakov Emden, he opens up his eyes. The story of the Jewish people throughout history is the ultimate expression, manifestation, and testimony of that. As to each and every one of us, we need to listen to the testimony and say, we accept it or not. That's already cheshbon that each person has with himself and with God. If he does exist, I happen to think that he does exist. These issues are as a chiyuv as can be on a Jew to reflect upon. No less, I always say, than a chiyuv of putting on tefillin in the morning. No less than putting on tzitzit. No less than keeping Shabbat. How do I know? Moshe Rabbeinu told us in his closing words in Parshat Ha'azinu. Some older guys here say that's my pasuk. Seder, there's such a thing as my pasuk. Source number 8. Just one pasuk from Parshat Ha'azinu, the story, or the song in fact, of the history of the Jewish people from beginning to end, not what might be, rather that which will be. The Rambam dealt with it in terms of its supposable, seemingly contradiction to freedom of choice. Philosophers here, you're invited to come, we can discuss it in another opportunity. But, says source number 8, Zechor Yemot Olam, I command you to reflect, to remember the days of the world. Binu, try to understand the years of Dor Vador. This is an obligation. You'll tell me it doesn't come out to be written in Taryag Mitzvot and Sefer HaChinuch or in any other of the... I agree with you. How to formulate it exactly? We have thumbs, Baruch Hashem, we can use them. How exactly to explain how and what category it is exactly. But the shot of the words is as simple as can be. You have a chiyuv to reflect upon the patterns of history. And if you don't do that, you might be missing out, I'm adding those words, on the very bottom line of Kol HaTorah Kula. I know these are daring words, I'm allowing myself to say that. You want to argue? You can argue. This comes at the closing words of Moshe Rabbeinu. The next parsha down, Parshat Zot HaBracha, Moshe Rabbeinu is giving out brachot. The last teachings of Torah is Shirat HaAzinu. And for thinkers over here, beware of the fact, some of you may be aware of that already, you can't separate HaTorah keTorah from the Shira of HaAzinu. They're equivalent to each other. Because Ve'ata kitvu lachem et hashira azot, I'm saying this in brackets for people who don't understand what I'm talking about. Ve'ata kitvu lachem et hashira azot, which shot-wise is talking about the Shira of HaAzinu, becomes, yes, a mitzvah, Mitayag mitzvot, to write a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah, we're talking about Shira Ha'azinu. Maybe there's an equation over there. Either way, we have a chiyuv to reflect upon our history. And if we do, we may come to see the ultimate testimonies for God's ruling over the world. And if we may not, we may be missing out on the very bottom line of it. How does it relate to everything we're talking about? It relates as such. Look inside, please. Source number 9, source number 10. The Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, which we saw before, does not teach us what is that power in the world, what is that nation in the world that will attempt to prevent Klal Yisrael at the end of days of being redeemed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That nation that will put a barrier between the lion and the lioness. Oi to that people. Oi to that nation. The Gemara does not tell us. I believe the Medrash does. Look inside. Let's start off, in fact, with source number 10. Pirkei de Rav Lezer. Midrash Pirkei de Rav Lezer Very interesting medrash. We have it in the library. Not easy, not hard to understand. Not like Medrash Rabbah. It's very easy flow. Highly recommended to look at. Amar Bilam. This is going on in our pasuk. Oy mi'ichyeh misumo el. Oy mi'ichyeh misumo el. Says the medrash. Amar Bilam. Mishivim leshonot shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo. Of the 70 languages, nations that is, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in His Word, L'sam shmo le'echad me'em elel Yisrael. Hashem put His name, Shem Kel, only in one people, Yisrael. Ho'il, however, v'yishva Kadosh Baruch Hu shmo shel Yishmael le'shmo shel Yisrael. He equated on some level Yishmael to Israel, because he also put his name El there in the Shem Yishmael. Oy, therefore, Oy mi'ichyeh b'yamav. Oy, who will be able to live in his days? What does it mean, live in his days? Shene'emar, Oy mi'ichyeh misumo el. Medrash Perikei the Rav Lezer opens up our eyes to that which the Gemara in Sanhedrin covers up, and I suspect that they do go hand in hand together. It's just that the Gemara hides that which the Medrash, and it often happens, opens up and reveals to us that it's referring to the people of Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael, of all people, I always find that interesting. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, 15 dvarim atidim b'nei Yishmael la'asot ba'aretz b'achrit ha'yamim. 15 things are the children of Yishmael are future to do in the land of Israel at the end of days. There's a whole long list over here, very thought-provoking. We don't have the time to go through all of them. I'll just mention one or two. One of them is quite amazing historically. They will turn the graveyards of Jews into garbage dumps. We know exactly what was found in Har Zaitim and in other places after 67 war, when we got there after many, many years. They will build, according to some shots at least, their own temple on the Temple Mount. The Medrash continues and says, I'm skipping to the second column, to the left. In those days of Bnei Ishmael taking over the ruling in the world, and specifically in Eretz Israel, Ya'amod Tzemach ben David. Tzemach ben David, Mashiach ben David, will come as a result of all that. Skip 2 lines. We don't have time to see everything inside. V'od haya Rabbi Yishmael omer, 3 milchamot shel mehuma, 3 wars of chaos. Atidin Bnei Ishmael asot ba'aretz, b'achrit ha'yamim. 3 wars are Bnei Ishmael future to do in the land of Israel at the end of days. Shene'emar, etc. Skip together with me down below. Misham ben David yitzmach v'yireh b'ovdan shel elu ve'elu, etc., etc., etc. Another source number 9, another Perikei the Rav Lezer, one parak further, the Medrash here claims, why is Ishmael called Ishmael? A different twist. V'karat shmo Yishmael, v'lama nikra shmo Yishmael, she'atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lishmoa v'kol na'akat ha'am mima she'atidim b'nei Yishmael la'asot ba'aretz b'acharit ha'yamim. Yishmael, look at how reversed that is. Yishmael is called Yishmael because Hashem, at the end of days, is future to listen. Hashem is future to listen. Lishmoa, the kol na'akat ha'am, the screams, the crying of Bnei Israel because of what Bnei Yishmael are going to do to Bnei Israel and Eretz Israel, b'achrit ha'yamim. Okay? All this leads to the following. And this finds significant support in Talmidei Arizal, sources in the Zohar that talk about it as well. And that is, even though Brit Ben Abitarim spoke about, according to Chazal, the 4 world powers that rule over the world, and the last one being Galut Edom, which will finally end with Yimot HaMashiach, Chazal open up our eyes to realize that at the end of Galut Edom, there will be another Galut. And that's the way Talmidei Ari and other sources refer to it as Galut Yishmael. Galut Yishmael, another Galut in Eretz Israel, as these Midrashim allude to, where Yishmael is going to take control over part of the land. The Zohar says that its merit is its Brit Milah, which is a prerequisite for the land of Israel. He has a Brit Milah. He has some kind of a limited control over the land. Obviously, this goes into deep secrets. What does that mean? But in any case, this is what Chazal say. Go on for just a few more minutes. The question that Sefer Bereshit is busy clarifying. Yishmael versus Yitzchak. And we said that the Ramban tells us you have an obligation to reflect upon. Where does that clarification manifest itself historically? Klal Yisrael and Bnei Yishmael have a war today over this mountain, over Beit HaMikdash. And Avram keeps screaming throughout history. And the echo continues till this very day. Sit here, shvu lachem po im hachamo. You are an am hadomeh lechamo. That place doesn't belong to you. And therefore, what we see in front of our eyes, the truth of the matter is, if we were on the proper level, every single time we walk through the Kotel Plaza and see what's there, we really should feel that we want to, excuse my language, to vomit. I'm sure that's what Avraham Avinu would say. Because he really doesn't have any belonging to that place. He is a chamor. He resembles the chamor. Should I tell you what I think the pshat is? I can tell you what I think. Yishmael has 50% of his genes are from Avraham Avinu, the person who brings emunah into the world. Yishmael has very strong emunah. I remember a few times in JFK seeing Jews just before Shkia going into a telephone booth. Do they still have those such things? I don't know. But it's a daven mincha. But an Arab puts down his mat in front of everybody. Doesn't have any busha. He's davening. But he has another set of genes. 50% from Hagar. Ha-Mitzrit, from Mitzrayim, the son of Ham, who we know did not obey the laws of the Mabul, who was not cleansed by the Mabul. And we know what he did with his father after the Mabul. And we know how he ruins God's tzniut of God's world. And his son is Mitzrayim, who together with Canaan define Arayot on Yom Kippur afternoon. We just read it as I said before. So 50% is coming from Mitzrayim. So when you join the two together, what does it look like? It looks like somebody who on the one hand has tremendous emunah, and he'll sacrifice his life, as we heard this week, screaming his name in a shul in Har Nof. And what he's convinced is that he goes up and he gets a Gan Eden of Mitzrayim. He's convinced that his great-grandfather's fantasies of an adolescent are going to be finally fulfilled in his warped concept of heaven. And that's what we deal with today. And it comes out in so many different ways. And we sense so deeply. This past week, people, as we said in the beginning, in the middle of Tfilat Shmona Esrei, at a moment of intense Yirat Shamayim, Tahara, Kedusha, people, Talmidei Chachamim, Imidot Tovot, try. We're not perfect. Try to devote their life to good deeds in God's world. To teach Torah during the week. To give out food la'aniyim on Erev Shabbat. As we heard about Rav Tversky's Hashem Yimkom Damo Zecher Tzadik Levracha. And at that moment, to be attacked, the primitive is not low enough of a word. Barbaric is not low enough of a word. No words are legitimate. And therefore always the words of politicians here from everywhere in the world seem so empty, cheap, in response. But a Ben Yisrael, a Ben Torah, Ben Tfilah, that understands somewhat what is the inside world of Yirat Shamayim, of Tahara, of Kedusha, of Midot Tovot, of Gemilut Chasadim, of Tfilat Shmona Esrei, Bekavanah, of a person who just wants to do good in God's world, and that's all that he wants. At that moment, to meet the face of cruel hate on the most primitive form that you think is no longer in our world. We're advanced, we have computers, we're so... and all of a sudden the world of primitive man comes back in the ugliest of faces. You know what? Uglier than ever in the past. Why? Because Yishmael is part of Shem. That means, you want to know what Cham looks like when he reappears in Shem? That's exactly these people. That's Cham in the tents of Shem. And that's what makes it so deeply ugly. Because they are part of this modern world today, supposedly. And they're a monotheistic religion. And it's not one or two. And I'm not here to dismiss every single person that is a Muslim. Absolutely not. And there are very right-wing people in this room who dismiss my words, so we'll have to agree that we disagree. I personally know such people. You want to argue with me? Yeah, but you turn the back, they'll put a knife in your back? I don't accept it. I'll prove it to you. Chazal say Yishmael at the end of his day did tshuva. But there are too many, thousands and millions of Bnei Yishmael who live in a sick warped, primitive world of cruelty and fantasy. Why is it important to know all this? Why is it so important for me to share? For those who at least don't know, I'm sure older people here are familiar with these sources, but for people who don't know, why is it so crucial? And the truth of the matter is, I must be honest, I for years already, I sensed that there are even many Talmidei Chachamim, much bigger than little Amos Luban. I'm not trying to sound humble. Much bigger. They don't think in these terms. They're not aware of such sources, which are totally available. This is not some kind of a far out, who knows, the Zohar. These are Midrashim, Gemarot. We just have to open up such sources to be interested in it. Why does it make so much of a difference? It makes all the difference in the world in my eyes. And if I had any doubt about it, so in a very interesting and painful conversation that I had with one of the dearer people that recently joined our Yeshiva, Rav Shlomo Creditor, who of everybody in the Yeshiva, from what I know, was closest to the event and testifies and was at the site and knew the people, and told me, and I asked him Rashut just before it began if I can share our conversation. We were standing in the library talking about these concepts, and Rav Shlomo said, I can't tell you, my whole life is just completely shaken up. And he put it in the best terms. A human being, especially in our generation, growing up in the Western comfortable world, thinks life is meant to go in a certain track, and all of a sudden, you're hit with such intensity that it shakes up the whole basis of your entire life. And all of a sudden, you start thinking, maybe life has a completely different track to it. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to open up your eyes. Life is completely different than what you so deeply, or your society so deeply, even from society, convince yourself that it is. I beg every person to take Shlomo's words, Rav Shlomo's words, to deeply to heart. Especially Shana Bet, Shana Gimel, older people. I think that might be a little challenging for some Shana Aleph people. In general, I wasn't sure whether it's suitable so much to Sicha for Shana Aleph people. Because the outcome of what we're saying, and I'll conclude with this, and this is what I shared also with Rav Shlomo. Last Shabbat, we summed up Sarah's life as being eternally defined as Me'arat HaMachpelah. I'm sure these things are brought down, different versions, different styles, defining her and our life as Machpelah, as a double life that takes place in two worlds simultaneously. In Olam Hazeh, and hovering above it, there's another floor, just like Me'arat HaMachpelah, another life. Two lives, and now there are many different levels, and one can understand it. On the level that Shlomo and I spoke about, is as following. What we see from all the sources we saw this evening. B'rit Bnei B'Talim, God's master plan that's unfolding, not every now and then, and the Ramchal and Dat Vunot, for those familiar, drives it in very well, every single day, from Yetziat Mitzrayim, Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh, and Ad Biat Mashiach Tzidkenu B'mera B'yameinu, every single day, God is busy pulling the strings of history, sometimes in ways which are more apparent, and sometimes in ways which are completely not apparent. But every single day is He busy pulling the world, and the Jewish people in the centerpiece of it, to its destination. At every single stage, Klal Yisrael is going to have to clarify itself, its identity, on the contrasting background of another people, another world power. Once pagans, and then a whole new world. We're coming up soon to Hanukkah, Greeks, a new challenge. Jews like to think. Jews appreciate beauty. Jews appreciate depth, philosophy, new challenges. You have to clarify yourself and identify and define yourself in ways that you did not have to in the past. Implications still today, every time a good Jew walks onto a college campus. You're dealing with the Greeks and their imprint on the world. If I paraphrase Chazal. Every generation with its clarifications. But I need, that's part of God's rules, laws of history. You need always an opposing force to clash with through which you can define yourself. That's the meaning of a world of Etz Hadat Tov Ra. You need Ra for Tov to define himself, and vice versa. You can't work without opposites. You cannot become, for example, I always bring this example, Yosef HaTzadik owes his title Tzadik to Eshet Potiphar. If not for her, he would never become Yosef HaTzadik. So it would be another Eshet Potiphar, but there needs to be an Eshet Potiphar to put him in a place that otherwise he won't reach that clarification which would lead him to become Yosef HaTzadik. And one can also fail these tests and clarifications. After all the process, there will be one more clarification. But from what seems from our sources, inside Eretz Yisrael, which we're getting to see and experience year after year with another force in the world, they're not a world power. I don't think they deserve to be referred to as a malchut. They're so not noble in their ways, in their accent, and their demeanor. They don't deserve to be a malchut. They're a ama domeh lechamo. A lion may be compared to malchut, not a chamo. At the end of days, just before Mashiach comes, that's what the sources say. It's up to every person to say, accept these words of Chazal, don't accept these words of Chazal. It's an avodah of every person with himself, between himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Chazal. At the end of days, before Mashiach comes, when Klal Yisrael is gathering back, when Hashem is busy redeeming His children, a process. There will be a people that will put a barrier between a lion and a lioness. Yeah, these are animals that represent Malchut, true Malchut in the world, Malchut Melech HaMashiach. Oi to that people. And we should be able to say that. Every time we see one of them trying to attack us, Oi! Mi yichye misumo. Oi, I'm telling you, you're going to pay the price. People have been asking me about, what is the meaning? Ben came to me today also. Of Hashem taking revenge at the end of days. I can't develop it too much. I'm not claiming to fully understand it, not even partially. But Hashem will take revenge at the end of days. And Hashem tells them, Oi! You're going to pay your price. Everybody's going to pay their price. And they're going to pay their price as well. Why is this so important to know? Because it puts all of our life here in Olam Hazeh in a completely different context. That's why. And that's the words of Rav Shlomo Creditor this morning. You come to realize that our life is double. There's my daily life where I do wonderful things. I learn, I try to work on my midot. It's taking place on Olam Hazeh in changing moments and hours of the day. And my life for the next few years, and my 70 years or 80 or 90 years of life. And then there's a whole other layer hovering above, machpelah, another layer that most people are not aware of. And don't realize there's another layer, another realm. And that's God's historical master plan that's busy unfolding every single day. For older people here who want to develop these concepts, you have to learn Sefer Dat Tvunot of Ramchal. The older people here heard that many times from me. That will be the Sefer that most clarifies, stage after stage, these concepts. And in many ways, it's completely in the background of everything that we're talking about this evening. And when we get overly immersed in the first realm, and we live only in the first floor, we Jews can't have that luxury of living only in one floor. You need to live in a machpelah, 2 floors. And when you do live only in one floor, when we do that, Hashem shakes up our first floor. And that's why Jews always have it more challenging in this world. And we had it all throughout the ages. It's just as Rav Shlomo said this morning, correct. In our generation, we're not already, the history, the Holocaust belongs to history, pogroms belong to history, massacres belong to history, Talpat belong to history. This is already a different day and age. Jews in Germany also thought so, of course. We're a different day and age. We're modern, we have technology, we have computers, everything is completely different. We don't see blood, we're good. The world is more or less okay, and it will continue being okay like this for ad netzach netzachim. And when we fall into that place, every person in his own way, which is a dusty place, can be even a moldy place and an unhealthy place, Hashem shakes up our world to force us to realize, I'm cracking up first floor, only for you to open up your eyes. There's something much bigger happening in life than just your own private story. Your private story is precious and important, but it must be seen in a broader context. We'll end on the following note. When a person knows that what happened this past week, it's not just a local tragic event, it's been going on for weeks. in Yerushalayim. And it's been going on for years, and it's been going on for decades, and centuries, and in a broader sense, it's been going on ever since we came out of the day we came out of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And it never ended. And and we get to see time and again, they're gone from the face of the earth. Yishmael's fate is going to be the same one as the one from, I'm not going to mention his name here in our holy Bet Midrash from 70 years ago. The same fate is going to come to them. But we're in the midst of the process now. But a Jew has a chiyuv to open up his eyes and not to be overly shaken, to be in total pain over what happened this week, recent weeks, earlier in the summer. In pain, yes. Chas v'chalila, depression not. Chas v'shalom, to go into a place of low. On the contrary, and that's the Ilui Neshama that I was talking about at the beginning. One has to come out of such a week when one's Neshama is elevated, in pain and elevated, and they don't contradict. And that's why ultimately I'm able to hug Rav Ami and say Mazal Tov to him, as we said in the beginning, and at the same time see the faces of the Nirtzachim Hashem Yinkom Damam. And they coexist. And they completely coexist, as this Sikha and Rabbi Yoel's beautiful engagement on the porch as we're speaking and hearing in the background. For Jews, they coexist. Not separately, they coexist. Because together they make our life meaningful. And the meaningfulness of our life has so many different shades to it. But the most important thing is, when I realize these sources, everything falls into a certain sensible, meaningful context. It's not a random world. Things just don't happen in a totally tragic, cruel way. It's cruel. It's tragic. But it's part of a master plan. We don't understand the morals of God. But we have a chiyuv to try to understand whatever we could in terms of the way He rules over His world. When a person internalizes such concepts, he can walk around the world not confused, and not overly troubled, and not even overly afraid. He can walk around the world with might, with pride that Hashem selected him and his friends to be members in this elite unit called Klal Yisrael. Few, very few, get to be in this closed club. Closed, get open. If you're really like Ruta Moaviyah, you can join. And if not, not. But it's a closed club for people who merit to be in this unit. And to have that sense when you walk around the world, a world of meaningfulness, a world of the most meaningfulness possible, that draws from the meaning of nothing less than all of history. A Jew who starts thinking along these lines, when everywhere he goes, and ultimately in every moment of any little day, he realizes there is no such thing as a little day, because he always has thousands of years of history hovering over his shoulders, and influencing and infusing every moment of his day, and his life, and his marriage, and his relationship with his kids, and his Shabbat conversations at the Shabbos table. I'm not talking about the Knicks, and not about the latest BMW. I'm talking about God's world, which is gorgeous, and full of meaning, and full of purpose, and life transforming, and sometimes painful, but the pain doesn't put me down. Even the pain puts me up. And as a result, I can come out of such a week with an elevation to my soul. B'ezrat Hashem, it should be an elevation to the four souls that went up